becoming stronger in all areas. Later today, High Speed Toastmaster's very own Byron Embry will be challenged in an area that is not his strong suit, as he will be a part of a panel of his peers and must defend his viewpoint on a very controversial topic. This morning, our job, your job as an audience, is to play devil's advocates. Whether you agree or disagree with his viewpoints, the goal here is to challenge him with very difficult questions. Byron must not contradict himself or appear uncomfortable while deflecting difficult questions. Please welcome this morning, Mr. Byron Embry.
Well, first of all, thank you for joining me here this morning. Our nation is in conflict. We have protests across the country, and rightfully so. Nothing new. We are a nation that peacefully, historically, has let our opinions, our voices be heard in that manner. However, this is different. Let me begin by saying that my heart goes out to the community of Ferguson, the family of Michael Brown. As an African-American male who has been profiled several times, I understand the frustration. I understand the confusion. And I understand the pain. However, growing up with law enforcement, it's my background, I have to stick to facts. And the facts that have been presented to us make me believe that this particular case was not racial profiling. This particular case, based on evidence, seems to indicate this was about an officer who did his job. On August 9th, this year, 11:51 a.m., a call is received by the Ferguson Police Department stating that a suspect fitting the description of Michael Brown was robbing a store. 9 minutes later, Officer Darren Wilson approaches Brown and a friend and asks them to get on the side of the street. Something derogatory must have been said, because there's no reason for an officer to drive and pull back and then park his car at an angle. Based on evidence, we know that there was an altercation inside the car. Based on evidence, we know shots were fired inside the car after the scuffle. Based on evidence, we know that Michael Brown was fatally shot at a distance of about 20 feet. Initially, when I heard this, I heard the witnesses talk about his hands being up. With 4 witnesses saying the same thing, who did not know each other, it was very difficult for me to believe that that was not the case. His hands are up, you shot. Hands are up, that is a universal sign of surrender. But the evidence didn't reflect that. An African-American witness states that Mr. Brown turned and ran at the officer. The autopsy report supports that. Having 2 young African-American boys myself, I have to be able to understand the law enforcement job. I have to understand that when one of my boys crossed that line, an officer must do what is necessary to protect himself. Then I thought about myself as the officer. Michael Brown is 6'5", 295 pounds. I am 6'2", 255 pounds. Michael Brown would not have posed as big a threat to me as maybe he would have Officer Darren Wilson, or a female officer. I believe that I could have got Michael Brown to the ground and took him into custody. Officer Darren Wilson felt threatened and felt certain that had he not taken the appropriate action, he would be the victim in this case. This is not a case of racial profiling. The protest going across America is based on racial profiling. Because this does happen, folks. And it's very, very real. And though I don't believe Officer Wilson was guilty in any manner, there are a lot of officers who were. The protests you see in Boston, in Baltimore, in New York, in Denver, in San Antonio, in Los Angeles are reflecting the officers who were not indicted. The officers who never went to trial. It is my belief, based on fact, presented by the prosecution, who, in my opinion, did not exercise all the options, but he did present the evidence that the grand jury had to vote on, had to rule on. And for me, I have to stick with facts. Those facts have made me very unpopular the last 48 hours. Some of my statements have been rebuked by the African American community, but that's part of it. I have to stick with facts. With that, I'll take your questions. Jeff?
You keep talking about evidence, but this is, I mean, there was no trial, so how can you say that there was evidence that supports your position?
Sure. The autopsy report, the public autopsy report, and I guess you could call it a private one, simply suggest that if his hands were in the air, those shots would not have landed where they landed. Based on where his body was facing in the blood spatter, it does indicate that he did come at the officer. Testimony from the 4 witnesses had changed. The testimony contradicted itself. The testimony also did not reflect what the autopsy showed. One African American male did say he saw Brown charge at the officer. His testimony was the only one that supported the autopsy report, which then supported the story told by Darren Wilson. And that is the evidence that we have before us. Anything else that we speculate has no evidence. Was it racial profiling? It could have been. But can we prove that? No. So based on the evidence that we have, based on the facts that we have, that's what we have to go on. And that's the evidence I'm referring to. Carol?
I was lost when you said there was shooting from the car, and it was parked at a slant. Can you elaborate?
Sure. According to Officer Wilson and witnesses, Mr. Brown attacked Officer Wilson as he was getting out of his car. There was a struggle inside the car as Wilson had marks and bruises on his face. And according to Wilson, Brown attempted to go for his gun, attempted to go for Officer Wilson's gun, and attempted to shoot him in the car. That was Wilson's story. And ballistics do confirm that being the case. When shots were fired inside the car, Wilson looked down and saw blood on his hands, realized it wasn't his blood, and realized that Brown had been hit, in which he took off and ran. Then, Wilson got out of the car, asked him to freeze. He stopped momentarily, then turned around and came at Officer Wilson.
I'm trying to get my head around why Ferguson is being burned down. And the only way I can fathom this is I remember what happened when I was at Ohio State during the Vietnam War, and a lot of campuses across Ohio, Kent State and so on, people were so mad about the war, they had a rage and they had to do something about it, so they tried to set those campuses on fire. I'm trying to understand why that rage would be directed at the people, black and white, and shop owners and all that in Ferguson.
Very
I
good
don't know if you
question.
can answer that question.
Very good question.
I'm trying to figure it out.
I don't believe that the vandalism in Ferguson has anything to do with Michael Brown. In fact, the real guilty party here are those that are acting in this vandalism. Why do I believe that? I believe that these individuals did not want an indictment. Because had there been an indictment, there may have not been a reason to riot. It's the peaceful people of Ferguson who are demonstrating their voice in a peaceful way, and a peaceful way in New York have the heart and the agenda of Michael Brown's family. I do not believe that violence is a way to have your voice heard. What do we say to the single mother of 3 who saved all her life savings for that shop, for that store? And it's burned down for no apparent reason. Barry.
So if we're not going to change things through the justice system, how do you propose that we do?
Very good question. My suggestion is that police officers must take it upon themselves to select a 3rd grade boy and a 3rd grade girl and mentor them until they graduate. That is the only way we're going to build trust and build relationships with minority communities and law enforcement officials. As of now, due to the amount of racial profiling that a lot of us have experienced, there is very little trust. To build that back, I think officers have to invest in the personal lives of minority children.
Why did the police officers in Ferguson, in your opinion, fail to protect the businesses that were on fire?
I can't answer that. That's a question that goes well beyond my pay grade. It seems as if law enforcement officials were there to simply protect people in the riot. It seems like, which is wrong, it seems like the burning and the vandalism, and it was a lot to try to stop. It's a lot to control thousands of people when you're already outnumbered. So the minute 50 officers race to save a building, you've allowed 2,000 people to burn more police cars. So I think when it comes to lives and the protecting citizens of Ferguson and the police unit themselves, because they were outnumbered, they had to conserve resources. That's the only answer I could possibly give. Alex.
This whole story is, it's not just about Ferguson, I think. It's part of a bigger narrative that's going around the whole country. And do you see some double standards going on in this country? Because, you know, this has been made an issue of a white on black crime, but there are numerous examples of black on white crime, black on black crime, that don't make as much of the headlines as this incident was, you know, and the Al Sharptons don't go out and make issues of these other examples. So what's your opinion on that?
My opinion on that, and that's a really good point, I think that the African community must look at black on black crime before the finger can be pointed at the white on black crime. There are a lot of African American men who are yelling for justice and peace, and who have murdered more African American men than Wilson. So until we as a community take that stand, I don't think we can yell justice and peace until we come to grips with it with our own. Thanks so much.